Thank you, everybody, for attending. This is session 7, panel 1 of the conference. We have 3 papers coming up. I'll introduce each speaker as we go. My name's M.Rourke. I'm a professor of religious studies and theology in upstate New York, and I'm coming to you here from Rochester, New York. The format will be about 18 or 20 minutes for each of the 3 papers, one after another. We'll go in the order as they're posted on the website, first, second, third. I'll introduce each speaker before each paper begins. For the question and answer session, after the 3rd paper, we'll have 25 minutes or so, if we're disciplined about our time, for everybody to talk about all of the things that have been brought up by these excellent speakers. And we can use the chat area on your Zoom screen to go through the questions. I recommend that as questions come to you that you jot them somewhere, but not in the chat area, for the purposes of trying not to distract the speaker as they're, multitasking and reading and looking at their screens and all of that kind of a thing. But after the 3rd paper is over, please feel free to let loose in the chat box and we will deal with whatever we see when we get there. If the group is small enough, we may be able to simply unmute and talk that way, and we'll see how that goes. So let's get going. Our first speaker is going to give us a paper entitled Folklore and Mystical Stories, A Window to the Soul. This is Rabbi Dr. Michael Zedek. He is Rabbi Emeritus of Emmanuel Congregation of Chicago and Congregation B'nai Yehuda in Missouri. He now serves as a senior advisor to the Central Conference of American Rabbis. He also founded and co-hosts a radio show called Religion on the Line. And we look forward to hearing his words of wisdom. Thank you, Dr. Zedek.
I do too. So I am fairly confident that I'm not alone in sharing a fascination and maybe even an intoxication with stories. After all, it's hard to remember an essay, but stories are the anchors to remind us of what we are meant to be, and as well perhaps even have the quality of outflanking our resistance when we don't want to be what we are called to be. Or as one wag put it, a story is worth 1,000 facts. I'm also reminded in preparation of these remarks of some late night college, what we used to affectionately call bull sessions, in which we would have at least pretenses of great wisdom. And one of those regular topics was, what is the distinctive quality of human beings? What do we have uniquely that separates us from all the other life on this planet? And I recall lots of efforts to give explanation. For instance, human beings are the only animals who can embrace the quality of speech. And then, of course, dolphins put the lie to that conceit. All right, so let's rely on Aristotle. Human beings are tool makers. And then Jane Goodall's research gave a problem to that notion of distinction. Well, human beings are the only creatures who know we are going to die. But I'm quite confident some here are aware of the amazing research that have been done with elephants, and by the way, with other animals, that clearly demonstrate that there is a sense of finitude, a sense of mortality, an awareness of death, mourning practices in connection with death. Now, it may be that human beings have a longer horizon, an awareness and a denial of the notion that we are finite and wish not to be, but that's far from distinctive. No, as it happens, human beings, perhaps with a little bit of tongue in cheek, may be the only creatures who think it's important to find out what separates us from the other creatures in this world. But more specifically, so far as we know thus far, standing the test of time, human beings are the only people, the only life who are storytellers. And we are storytellers because I would suggest we are meaning seekers. We are the only creatures who think our existence is a problem which must be solved or at least resolved. And stories matter. In fact, students of world literature often point out there are 7 basic plots. If that's the case, then how different traditions tell what I'll put quotation marks around the same story may be a remarkable window in what is valued in that culture and the values of the culture. But along came Tolstoy and suggested there really aren't 7 basic stories, there are really only 2. The first story begins a stranger came to town. And if one considers our response to the notion of stranger, generally it's suspicion, if not fear and outright danger. There's always a few folks who are intoxicated and intrigued by the stranger. The other story begins, I went on a long journey. And if one takes the biblical record seriously, I think it combines both of those, except it's instead of I, it's we are on a long journey, and we are the strangers who come to town. Well, as that background, enough of that, let's a story. Two stories. These are two of the oldest versions of this story, which exist in many cultures. The first one comes from Buddhist tradition. A woman's only child dies. She goes to see the Buddha. Restore my child to life. The Buddha responds, bring me a mustard seed from a home that has not known sorrow, and I shall restore your child to life. By the way, you could do a book this thick of mustard seed stories, including New Testament accounts where Jesus uses that image, because a mustard seed is exceedingly small, the ancient equivalent of a subatomic particle. Just bring me the littlest of something and I'll do what you request. And of course, she understands what the Buddha is teaching her. There is no such home. And she returns home, resigned to her fate. The Jewish version of that story. A woman's only child dies. She goes to see Elisha. For those who may be unfamiliar, he's the one who comes after Elijah. And he does, in the Hebrew Bible, a CPR-like reviving of a child who seems to have died. So he's the right one for folklore to pick for this tale. The woman says to the prophet Elisha, restore my child to life. And he says to her, bring me a mustard seed that has not known sorrow, and I shall restore your child to life. And here the story goes in a different direction. She goes looking for that mustard seed. Many years later, they meet, and a small detail of folklore, he recognizes her. They don't recognize each other. He says to her, why didn't you come back to me? And she responds, well, at first I was desperately looking for that mustard seed that would restore my child to life. But in every home I entered, there was pain. And I was too busy trying to relieve pain to return to you. Both stories convey wisdom. The Buddhist story is the wisdom of acceptance. What is what is what is. And it is the wisdom. The Jewish story conveys the wisdom of struggle, perhaps even in some fashion for good or ill, that which makes the West the West. The difference between the world as it is and the world as it should be. And we will struggle mightily, tilt at windmills endlessly in order to bring that distance bridged in some fashion. So with that as background, I want to turn to the oldest story thus far discovered. There may be others that come to light someday, but right now this is the oldest story we have. It's called the Enuma Elish, and it's the creation myth of ancient Mesopotamia. In the story, by the way, Enuma Elish means when on high, which is the first words. Titles are a later invention, but when on high, the gods are at war. And the war is indecisive, and the gods determine that it must be resolved. So each side is going to choose a champion who will fight to the death. So in this story, we learn gods can die. The good gods, that is the gods who are going to win, chooses their champion Marduk. We get the English name Mordecai, it's a cognate of it. And Marduk will meet in single combat to the death his adversary Tiamat. And Tiamat is a goddess in the form of a serpent, and her name means chaos, which I suggest to you at minimum means that men wrote this story, blaming all of it on the female. She's a goddess and her name means chaos. There's all the male ambivalence toward the female in one word. Marduk meets Tiamat and he slays her. And in his victorious frenzy, he butchers her body, and from her various body parts, the world comes to be. By accident, which is the critical point. It's an accident. None of it was intentional. And if it is an accident, then it is quite clearly full of sound and fury, and it doesn't signify very much at all. What's critical to this presentation is which body part gives rise to humanity. And for those who are unaware, the stuff inside her intestines springs to life as us, which is to say human beings are not quite fully formed stools. Garbage, to use the vernacular, we're crap, which is a perfect reflection of what, you can't even use the word human beings, what the life form we call humanity was in that ancient world. That's in stark contrast to the biblical account, as you know. First of all, creation is with intent and design and orderliness. And at the end of the creation story, you get human beings who are created with some peculiarly unique quality. Tselem Elohim is the Hebrew, image of God. Tselem is a fascinating word because more often it means idol than a positive term like image. It's the modern Hebrew word for photograph, which would suggest something quite remarkable about what human beings are or might be or should be or can represent. A place, a way to connect to deity. Perhaps this true story may illustrate what I mean. 4-year-old child, beautiful little girl, and her mother were walking out of a family service. And the little girl said in a quote unquote indoor voice, which was much too loud, as in everyone could hear, "Mommy, the rabbi's sermon confused me." Now, were I there, I would have gotten very worried because the mother might say something, "Oh, honey, don't worry, he confuses everyone. It's no big deal." But instead, the mother said, "Why is that, honey?" I thought that was a much more promising beginning to a good story. And the little girl said, "Mommy, the rabbi said God is bigger than we are. Is that true, Mommy? And wherever you are on theology, the universe is far bigger than any." "That's true, honey. God's bigger than we are." "But Mommy, the rabbi said there's a part of God in every one of us. Is that true, Mommy?" And of course, the outrageous claim of the Hebrew Bible is that there's a part of deity, part of infinite, part of sacred in every human being. And the mommy said, "That's right, honey. There's a part of God in every one of us." And then this little 4-year-old said the singularly most remarkable theological statement I've ever heard. She said, and I quote, "Mommy, if God is bigger than we are and God lives in us, wouldn't God show through?" Wouldn't God show through? Now that may be very poor theology, but I think it's a wonderful, a marvelous anthropology. And I would love to imagine that we've all met people like that, even if we wouldn't use that vocabulary. People filled with a joy and centeredness and enthusiasm and wonder. And maybe enthusiasm is the perfect word because if you know, as you likely know, it comes from the Greek enthusiasmos, which means to be full of God. Or as Rabbi Akiba, a 2nd century Jewish sage and martyr, writes, "Great love was shown to humankind in that we are created in the image of God. Even greater love that we can know that we are created in the image of God." Now, the Yiddish word for such a concept might very well be chutzpah, outrageous lack of humility. But the Hebrew Bible concretizes it over and over again. For instance, in Proverbs, "Ner Hashem nishmat adam," a person's, it's so hard to translate, I will give the normal translation, a person's soul is God's light. That somehow, as though it were possible, without us, God doesn't get into the world. The sacred is all around us and in us. That said, there are moments where such a convenient and delightful hypothesis can be put to the test. For instance, I've often wondered what in the world is the purpose for teething and teenagers. So for teething, I generally do not understand why a child has to go through that challenge and why parents have to endure that nightmare as well. But teenagers, having survived my own encounter with my teenage children, now long into adulthood, it's God's way of you wanting to let them go. Or as Mark Twain once put it, when a child reaches age 13, put him in a barrel and feed him through the hole. When he reaches age 16, seal up the hole. That was meant to be a bit of a humorous interruption, but I'll go back on point with another story. This from the remarkable storyteller, Harry Golden. He tells a story about his relationship to his father when Harry was a teenager. And not untypical of teenagers, uncomfortable with the inconsistencies of his parent, more than tolerant of his own. Well, his father was part of an immigrant generation that was very much identified with what we would call socialism/atheism. Nonetheless, his father was a regular attender at synagogue. So Harry said, this is ridiculous. This is a contradiction in terms. He confronted his father with, why do you go? You know you don't take any of that seriously. And the father, in his defense, said, do you know Garfinkel? Of course I know Garfinkel. Garfinkel is your best friend. Well, Garfinkel goes to synagogue to talk to God. I go to synagogue to talk to Garfinkel. Well, the deeper insight into that is, at least from a biblical perspective, when you're really talking to, meeting with, connecting with the Garfinkels in our life, you are presumably getting as close as it is possible to the image and the experience of holiness, or to use the traditional Western word, God. Martin Buber put it this way: it is in relationships with each other that we meet the power behind all relationships. Or as the wonderful musical Les Miserables put it, this truth that is forever certain, to love another person is to see the face of God. Buber also suggests that if we stop just using the word God for 100 years, and when we opened our mouths again, we might start making some sense. And I think there's an enormous amount of sense in that. But I want to turn to my two concluding stories so that there is time for my co-presenters and for conversation, queries, questions, and alternative speeches. The first comes from Arabic folklore, and it concerns a character who is presented as though he were the quintessential fool, albeit in almost every folklore tradition, the fool is the embodiment of wisdom in the tale. So this story. Hamdi is appointed for 3 weeks running to give the sermon on Friday afternoon at the mosque. He mounts the minbar the first Friday, and all the people in the mosque are looking up with anticipation at the fun they're going to have at Hamdi's expense. He looks out at the expectant crowd and says, "Good people, do you have any idea what I'm going to talk about?" And they respond, "No." He says, "Well, if you have no idea what I'm going to talk about, there's no reason to waste time," and he leaves. The next week, "Good people, do you have any idea what I'm going to talk about?" And of course, remembering what happened the week before, they all respond, "Yes." And he says, "Well, if you already know what I'm going to talk about, there's no reason to waste time," and he leaves. Third week, "Good people, chaos reigns." Half the community says yes, half the community says no, and of course he says, "If those of you who know what I'm going to talk about will tell those of you who don't, we'll save a lot of time," and he leaves. And the point of the story, of course, is that we are good people. The challenge is always before us. Might we become better people? So this final tale, one that comes from the Yiddish theater. It's a little over 100 years old, and it was the creation of a playwright by the name of S. Ansky, Shmuley Ansky. In the play called the Dybbuk, and a Dybbuk, for those unfamiliar, is a possessing spirit, a demon possession. A rabbi undertakes an exorcism. By the way, the typology of demon possessions in the ancient world almost always involved a botched life cycle event, which is to say, it's a vocabulary that in our time we might well use psychological terminology because of the anxiousness that is always around family gatherings. That aside, back to the story. Before the rabbi's about to give his effort at an exorcism, he offers the following in paraphrase. It's a series of 4x4, and I implore you, please listen to the whole thing, because if you only listen to the first part, you would think, my God, what a xenophobic and ethnocentric story. It doesn't end there. 1, all times are holy. Special holiness, the holidays. All holidays are holy. Special holiness, Jewish story after all, the Sabbaths. All Sabbaths are holy. The most holy Sabbath is the Sabbath called Shabbat Shabbaton, Yom Kippur. All languages are holy. Especially holy, the Hebrew language, because again, it's a Jewish story. All the words of the Hebrew language are holy, but the most holy words are the names of God. And you may know Hebrew has a lot of names for God. But the most holy name for God is the Tetragrammaton, the name we don't pronounce, the 4-letter name, mistranslated Yahweh, etc. All places are holy. Most holy, the land of Israel. All places in the land of Israel are holy. Most holy, Jerusalem. All places in Jerusalem are holy, but the most holy place is the Holy of Holies, the inner sanctorum of the ancient temple. All people are holy, and if anything is important, it is to recognize and celebrate and embrace that truth. All people are holy. Again, listen closely beyond what I'm saying now. Jewish story, especially holy the Jewish people. All the Jewish people are holy, but more is the high priest. Once a year on Yom Kippur afternoon, the most holy person entered the most holy place and he said one word, God's most intimate proper name. Now, in any folklore, that is a fate in the world hangs in the balance moment. Fortunately for me, the story doesn't end there. The rabbi goes on. The secret is, and now we're all going to know, any time can be Yom Kippur afternoon. Any place can be the Holy of Holies. Any person can be the high priest. And here's the most precious part of all. Any word spoken in true sincerity, one to another, that is God's proper name. I would offer that's the opportunity and the challenge for as long as the breath of life resides in us, which is probably why we call it inspiration, to take in the Spirit. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zedek. What a great way to start a panel. We'll have questions for all three of these speakers after all three have spoken. So now we will move right into our second speaker. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Mulayka Enriello, presenting a paper titled The Sober Mysticism and Spiritual Poverty in St.Dominic of Guzman and in Jalal al-Dinal Suyuti, an Interreligious Insight.
Thank you very much. Thank you also to Rabbi Zedek. What an introduction also to my humble presentation. I'd like to share my presentation in slide. I hope in that way I will stay in the time that I've been given, and I just have some technical problem. Yes, I can make it maybe. So if I can do.
You're able to see your screen.
Full screen. Yes, here I am.
Thank you.
So I tried to. I couldn't read the whole paper because it's too long. So I just want to present why I am here in this session about folklore, or the role of folklore, while presenting the life and teachings of two masters, which are two spiritual masters, a Christian one, which is St.Dominic Guzman, and even if I am a Muslim, I am very happy to honor this Christian saint in the year of his jubilee, because 1221 is the 8th centenary of the death of St.Dominic Guzman. It's not as famous as St. Francis, but he had an important role also in Italy. And so it's 12th, 13th century current era, while Jalal Suyuti is a Muslim saint, so is a Muslim Sufi master, of the 15th, 16th century of the current era. I try to compare these two figures because they have some traits in common, and especially because while Jalal ad-Din Suyuti is closer to us in time, so a few centuries before our era, St.Dominic of Guzman is contemporary of St. Francis, but strangely we don't know almost anything of his life. We have some traits we have received, especially from Dante in the Divine Comedy. So we go straight on. So the most biographical data are legendary or symbolic or apologetic narrations. Apologetic, as we usually call the symbolic traits which Dante Alighieri exposes or presents in the Divine Comedy, in the 12th canto of his Paradise. For example, he presents St.Dominic like being found by his mother down of his cradle when he was an infant. So in the very first years of his life, he is narrated to get out of his cradle and sleep on the floor, which would be a precognition of his ascetic aptitude. And other traits in a similar way are due to narrate to people the character of the saint. The other famous is the dream of his mother, of Joanna de Asa, which was a noble woman. St. Dominic is particular because he came from a noble family of the Castilian Spain, so the northern part of Spain, which was Christian and which was the border of the struggles against the Muslims, which were still present in southern Spain. And so the dream of his mother, who dreams a little dog bringing a flame in his mouth, which will blow up in fire all Europe, is the symbolic narration of the precognition of St. Dominic's mission to bring back the Christian faith against the Albige's heresies. And so the academic reading of these narrations by Dante Alighieri is that they are apologetic because they are finalized, they have they are studied in order to present what will be the character which is already known when they are written, the character of the saint. Anyway, a most popular or devotional reading of this narration is simply symbolic. So symbolic in the sense we use to give to this word in the religious environment, so not the academic one. In this sense, not to putting competition, academy, and religious environment, the dimension that we call folklore may be a key of understanding. Why? Because legends or oral transmissions may be the way in which some, I thank again Rabbi for his lecture, because I think we can, it's easier for me to speak about this dimension. We can seize some unspeakable dimensions of the spiritual aspects of the inmost aspects of religions only by symbolic narrations or only by allusive expressions. So that the output is often stories or even no story, like it was the way of doing sermons of the fellow of the Arab tale which Rabbi narrated. So in the case of St.Dominic, I found while trying to go back to my personal history, because I began my spiritual path as a postulant in the Dominican order, and then for a series of vicissitudes, me and other people went to find a spiritual path in the Islamic tradition. Nevertheless, I had studied the Dominican spirituality, and I would have liked to deepen some, to get back to deepen some aspects of Saint Dominic's spirituality. So I found that the only things we know as Saint Dominic's sermons, in fact, are not fully recognized as being attributable to Saint Dominic, because they are attributable to Blessed Alain de la Roche. Blessed Alain de la Roche lives in the 14th century, 14th, 15th century of the current era, is a French Dominican, and is in fact the founder of what today we call the Rosary Prayer, which is peculiar to the Dominican order. So, and which is the most popular way in which the Dominican order reaches reaches people. And Blessed Alain de la Roche writes down some sermons which he attributes to Saint Dominic by saying that he had a dream of Saint Dominic, which narrated him that the sermons that he gave in Toulouse when he was living in Toulouse. So there is a period of the life of Saint Dominic which is well known, and so which is in the official legenda, where he had relations with the local university, which universities were new at the time, and Saint Dominic went looking for disciples in every European university, be it Bologna or Toulouse or Paris. And then in Toulouse, he was in relation also with nobles, and he was very renowned. He was very well treated, while the official history always, again, the official history says that he preferred to go in places where he had right to be recognized as a teacher, as a spiritual teacher, because in Toulouse he had a too easy life with nobility and with the dignitaries and scholars. Alain de la Roche, so blessed Alain de la Roche, says that St.Dominic in dreams says to him that once he was, they asked him to give a sermon at the Sunday Mass, and he was beginning his speech, but he had a revelation and said something which I now read. So this is the dream of Blessed Alain de la Roche, who dreams Saint-Dominic, who narrates him that he was going to give a sermon, but he changed that sermon at the last minute because he had a vision of the Virgin Mary, who said, don't be too a friend with dead people, but speak out the truth as I say you to speak. And so I read a little piece of this sermon. The saint says, I ask, were you to be pilgrims in a region whose language you don't know, would it not be necessary for you to try and learn it, or that you use a trusted interpreter? Nobody will deny this. Now, we are actually pilgrims here in a foreign land, and we seek the city to come where the language spoken is the language of the angels. In such city, the exile will either learn the language or he will be removed from his homeland. Here, however, we have two schools at which we can learn this language, and they are the Father's Prayer, but in the original is Oratio Dominica, and the Angel's Visitation Greeting. And in the original, it is Salutatio Angelica. Let us then unceasingly frequent the word it contains, Nomen Tuum. So Nomen Tuum is a little part for those who don't know the Christian rituality of the Father's Prayer, the Holy Padre, the Padre Nostro, Pater Nostro. And this sermon is, this is a small part of the sermon, and it repeats the same pattern. If you were a pilgrim in a foreign land, or if you were in a stranger land, or in a dangerous land, and while focusing on the way to manage the situation, it comments one little small word or one little small part of one of the two prayers which form the Rosary. So we may say that Blessed Alain de la Roche wants to promote his Rosary of the two prayers of Saint Dominic, or he truly dreamt of Saint Dominic, or this is a third hypothesis we will never be able to demonstrate. Maybe he uses the dream as a literary stratagem, as well as Dante Alighieri maybe uses the dream of Saint Dominic's mother as a literary stratagem for apologetics, as some people say. But here the stratagem may be to bring on some teachings which had to be somehow transmitted only in a little only for people in times where the Templars were despairing, were yes, destroyed, and Frederick II was cancelled by the history of Italy. And I give only some suggestions. I'm not an historian, but dealing with the history of religions, especially in Italy, and dealing with interreligious dialogue, it is very frustrating to see how some part of Italian history is so difficult to get rid, so difficult to be rediscovered, because there's a sort of I use a strong word, but I'm sure it was not the intention, but in fact there was a kind of damnatio memoriae of some passages of the history of Italy and Europe. So maybe there was a current current which was simply transmitted orally, and in somehow at the time of Alain de la Roche was put down in writing, maybe to save it, with a literary stratagem, which is a dream. And so in the form of a dream, we can only have a popular legend or a folklore, but folklore may bring the memory of some words just to us. And my personal opinion about this is that if these words are not by St.Dominic, but are a dream of one of his further disciples 3 centuries later, what would have been the teachings of St. Dominic if just we had one? Because about the teachings, the direct teaching of St. Dominic, apparently we have not a word. And this is strange, because we are dealing with the monastic order, which has its charisma, study and teaching. So it's a strange, it's a very strange situation. I like to think that these teachings were truly the teachings of St. Dominic, and that the dream of Blessed de la Roche is a stratagem to put them in words and to let them survive to the vicissitudes of politics and culture of his time. On the other hand, Jalal Suyuti has a character which is similar to that of St. Dominic of Guzman, in the sense that he also has as a spiritual character is what we call in the Arabic in the Islamic tradition, it practices the jihad akli, that is the combat of intellectuality or spiritual intellectuality, just like St. Dominic was sent to combat the heresies. Apparently, also we must say also that, and I hope you will say if I have if I finish my time.
Yes, Dr. Enriello, yeah, you have about 2 more minutes.
Differently. Okay. So I just started and yes, he wrote very much. He wrote his autobiography, so just the opposite than St.Dominic. And I said here, what about folklore? In a time where there was the danger to forget also the Islamic doctrine. It was nine centuries after the Prophet. And in the debating with, if I might conclude with this, debating with the a scholar who said that Muslims had no right to celebrate the birth of the Prophet. I read what he says. Here is essentially what Al-Fakihani, which is the scholar, reports in his previously quoted text. He says, I know of no foundation concerning the Mawlid, neither in the book of God the Most High, nor in the tradition of his messenger. To this argument, we might retort that the fact of ignoring something does not at all entail it does not exist. In fact, Ibn Hajar found an argument speaking in favor of this practice in the, in the Sunnah, and I too, and I myself found a second one. So this for me is a, a sharp, essential topic about the role of folklore, because the fact of not being able to demonstrate academically something does not entail that that thing is not true. And this is the key for which folklore in his noble, the nobility of people, though the poor people, like Rabbi said before, good people will always have a key role in bringing on spirituality, and the academic research, I hope, will be more and more at service and synergy with this dimension. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Enriello.
So I conclude this way.
Thank you. We are really gazing into the depths of the thicknesses about how stories and truth interact and get passed along. So for our third speaker, Dr. Tatjana Myoko Prittwitz is monastic Buddhist chaplain and visiting assistant professor of the humanities at Bard College in upstate New York. She holds a PhD in comparative literature and an MA in curatorial studies and contemporary culture, and recently completed a 3-year residency at a Soto Zen training monastery in Japan. She's going to talk to us about the Zen Arts, a mystical entry point to a world of oneness.
Sorry. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining. You hear me now, okay? Okay, good. So, since similar to Dr. Enriello, I cannot read out the text. So I decided to speak a little bit more freely about the Zen arts. In order to mark the point of the Zen arts, I will juxtapose them with some accounts of Satori enlightenment experience, so you can understand the point of oneness that I want to convey. An calligrapher or painter will use an inkstone to make their own ink. you have an inkstone. It might smell, might be perfumed, and you first, in a very meditative way, you grind your own ink. This is a way to prepare the mind before you make a gesture. So the Zen arts provide an incredible way of both cultivating an artistic path of selflessness, as well as expressing what cannot be said in words. Their uniqueness comes from the fact that they originated within monastic settings and mindfulness stands in their center. Whereas in the contemporary Western art world, the cultivation of an individual, unique self seems to be crucial. In the traditional Zen arts, one trains by copying the masters and following established means of depiction or expression. In fact, the urge for bringing oneself forward is discouraged, as it would hinder a liberated view on how things really are. What does that mean, how things really are? What does it mean to get out of your way? Which truth is being revealed? The various training paths support the discovery of a no self, the self being empty, a mere construct. What can be seen when the self is forgotten? Who expresses what? Given the absence of an artist persona per se, the Zen arts are called the artless arts. And yet they're characterized by profound dedication and high quality. Is it because without the self, there is no limit? So we have many different Zen arts. Sumie, ink painting is one, calligraphy, haiku poetry, ikebana, flower arrangement, no theater, kyudo, the way of the bell, and chanoyu, tea ceremony. You might also say bonsai. I will a little bit give an overview of these Zen arts and, as I said, refer to Satori. So, quote of a scholar on the Zen arts, Zen culture has been devised over the centuries to bring us in touch with a portion of ourselves we in the West hardly know, our non-rational, non-verbal side. If we in the West wish to borrow from the complex world of Zen culture, we must first begin to train and intensify our powers of perception. I could speak volumes about the training in a monastery in Japan, which is non-verbal. Just so before we go into the Zen arts, Satori, enlightenment, is a real experience of the self-shattering and becoming one with the universe. There is sudden enlightenment, for example, with a famous one by the so-called sixth patriarch, Huineng, an illiterate woodcutter who got enlightened by hearing the Diamond Sutra on the marketplace, which points to the fact that one doesn't have to be clever in order to understand the truth. In fact, to be very clever will stand in the way of understanding the truth. Or gradual enlightenment. Hakuin, a wonderful Zen master and painter, wrote a lot about that in the 17th century. I want to quote one by the Chinese Zen Master Suyuti, who only died in 1959. He became 120 years old and he seeked his whole life for enlightenment. And so one time, after a lot of practice in meditation, it is his disciple who describes the experience of his master. With the lucidity born of his single-mindedness, he saw through both the body and mind. His numerous thoughts had suddenly ceased. When walking, he felt as if he were flying. Night and day had merged into one. After meditating one evening, the master opened his eyes and suddenly everything, both inside and outside the monastery walls, was penetrated with the brilliance of daylight. An attendant made his rounds, filling up the teacups. The master's hand was burned by spilling boiling water and his cup fell to the floor. At the sound of the crash, the root of his doubt was instantly cut off. He was joyous beyond words as having fulfilled his lifelong ambition. It was as if he had just awakened from a dream. And he wrote the poem, "The hand let go, the cup was shattered. Family is broken up, people have died. There's no way to talk about such things. Spring arrives, flowers are fragrant. Everywhere is infused with splendor. The mountains and rivers and great earth itself are just the Tathagatas. So enlightenment experience is often triggered by like a sound, famously like a pebble hitting a bamboo. But if you cannot express that in words, what you experience, that feeling of oneness, how will you do? And that's where the Zen arts come in. An important Zen expression of oneness is to make an enso. You might have heard an enso. Enso is just a single brush stroke of a circle. And you make your ink, you breathe, you have your brush in one single stroke, breathing in, breathing out, you make a circle. And that's it. That's the universe right here now. That is your mind. Experienced people can see how enlightened a master is by seeing an enso. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Zen teacher, he makes enso, used to make enso every day, and you can add text to it. And it is that very moment, and it expresses everything. So I quote from Stephen Addis, who's a scholar on calligraphy. It would seem that nothing could be more simple than this circle, enso, usually depicted in a single brushstroke. Did the monk take merely a few seconds to create this quintessential Zen statement? Might we also count the time he spent staring at the empty paper and preparing his mind and spirit? Or should we say that it took the monk 80 years, the span of his life, to produce it? If you consider the entire history of Zen passed on directly from master to pupil for generations, you may even decide that the enso took many hundreds of years to create. Calligraphy is another Zen art. You can, of course, you have mostly the kanji, which comes from China, and you have many different scripts, like the running script, or many different scripts. But of course, it is also a meditation practice. So, for example, mu, emptiness, in one strike of power and energy, you express mu. Or it can be, you can use American characters like on an haishiki, or you can write long, you can have scrolls, and it is the message. Sometimes actually you cannot read it, and then it's about the energy of the artist. In Japan, you do shakyo a lot, which is the copying of the Heart Sutra. The Heart Sutra stands in all Buddhist traditions in the center. And the most important words are, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Form is exactly emptiness, emptiness is exactly form. That is nothing you can comprehend with your linear logic mind. You have to enter it. And Shakyo, sutra copying, is one way of entering the sutra. So you will have, it's not long, the short version of the Heart Sutra, and you copy it. And so Taizan Maezumi Roshi was one of the pioneers who brought Zen to the West. He says, the sutra must be alive as the functioning of your life, trusting your life, as the sutra is the best way to be nice to yourself. Unify yourself with what you do. This is actually the key, this unity of your true life and the life of literally everything. I have a Heart Sutra here, like in a round version. There are many wonderful recordings online on the Heart Sutra. For the calligraphy, it's very interesting in talking about the no-self. There's a renowned contemporary calligraphy master in Japan. Her name is Kanazawa Shoko, and she's an artist with Down syndrome. And she's highly celebrated. And her mother, who's an acclaimed artist herself and who is her assistant, says, the people are so moved by the innocent energy of her daughter, who has no veil, who just brings forward her pure-hearted energy. And her calligraphy, people go to her presentations, people are so moved by the directness of her calligraphy expressed with no self. another Satori experience, this time from a Tibetan master, Yongye Mingyo Rinpoche, who teaches also in the West. He went on a 4-year pilgrim as an anonymous yogi in the Himalaya, and he became very sick. So he writes, and I slowly let go, let go, let go, let go. In the end, I even let go of myself. I thought, if I'm going to die, okay. If I'm going to die, no problem. At that moment, I didn't have any fear. Then I had some kind of dissolution experience, as they call in the text. I saw different colors, and then slowly I could not hear or see. The elements of the body were dissolving, and then I lost touch with my physical body altogether. I watched this process happening, and then I had a wonderful experience. There was no thought, no emotion, no concept. My mind was clear and wakeful, like a blue sky with the sun shining, transparent and all-pervasive. There was no inside and outside, no subject and object, no sense of body, and no ordinary sense. At the same time, my mind was pervasive, knowing and very clear. I knew what was going on, but it was not like a normal experience. It's very difficult to describe. I cannot really put it into words. So the training path in Zen is to shed off the armors of the self. So Dogen, the founder of the Soto school in the 13th century, he says, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. And to forget the self is to be one with the 10,000 things. And so that is when you also, for example, paint. A painter will have to paint the orchid, the bamboo, the plum blossom, the chrysanthemum over and over and over again, shedding the self. Quote, in the West, there's a tendency to have our gardens overflowing with beauty. Simplicity means that the creative space and process are sparse, unobtrusive, not cluttered. In a sense, aggressiveness is toned down, diversity is avoided. In the simplicity, there's a touch of boundlessness, nothing limited, a cloudless sky. And you might all be familiar with haiku as an important Zen art. It only has 575 syllables. That's it. So to take a haiku by Basho, stillness, sinking deep into the rocks, cries of the cicada. Stillness, sinking deep into the rocks, cries of the cicada. And that's it. It's like just little dots. And you, as a recipient, enters. You have to close the energy stream. It becomes a dialogue between Basho having a moment and you having a moment. But it's light. It's just a small touch. And so, channel you. Maybe, hang on. I have what I brought from painting. Because of course I paint. Like just, this is a tea master. Just some strokes. Just a hint. Oh, this is a little bit more literal. Can become more modern. But you start out with many orchids and bamboo. Channel Yu tea ceremony is probably the most poignant expression of the Zen arts. In Japan, it has really become like a national expression of what Zen is. I don't know if you ever have the chance to attend a tea ceremony. It can be a whole afternoon. It's an experience of another world. You go into a garden, you wait, you drink some warm tea. The tea master will ring a bell and will say that it's ready. You crawl into a small space in a very dim room. Leave your shoes outside. There's a tokonoma with a scroll, with some saying. There is a flower arrangement. There is the scent. There is the kama and hot water. And it's really an elaborate dance of the tea master preparing a cup of tea for you. And it can be literally hours, the whole ceremony. And the arts are also so present. Everything is carefully chosen. Like just, you have done matcha or have seen a matcha whisk. Is this just split bamboo? It's so amazing, but it's just a piece of bamboo. You find bamboo everywhere in Japan. And then you whisk the tea in a bowl. So in the end, when you have your tea, it's much more than a tea. It's a celebration of life. So Enriello, the founder of tea ceremony, as we know today, he says, when you take a sip from the bowl of powdered tea, there within it lies, clear reflected in its depths, blue of sky and gray of sea. That is it. That is like the meeting of souls as you talked about before. So these are all the ways. Do, Dao, Dao like the Dao De Jing, Do, Cha Do, the way of the tea, Sho Do, the way of riding, Ka Do, the way of the flower, Kyu Do, the way of the bow, Ken Do, the way of the sword. So if you have a flower, your teacher will tell you to study the flower, to listen to the flower, to see what the flower needs, to highlight its beauty when you arrange it. So I have a quote by my Ikebana teacher. Ikebana is often defined as a contemplative art, mindfulness practice of floral art. Ikebana is more fully a way or path to seeing the truth and surrendering to it. The student can learn to open more fully to the natural world and honor its laws of balance. The student learns to allow the branches and flowers to be what they are without trying to impose human patterns on them and then lets go. All is impermanent. Who is the arranger? What is being arranged anyway? What is arranging? Is there such a thing as non-arranging, arranging? And that you also have in Kyudo. You might know the famous book by Eugen Herrigal, who talks about the arrow shooting itself, like snow falling from a bamboo leaf. And I see I'm running out of time. I started at 10:02, so I have 2 more minutes about. So we cannot talk about Kyudo, the arrow finding its target, the Zen arts becoming the so-called finger pointing to the moon. It makes visible the invisible. So I was reflecting on how we can bring this to our world, because not all of us can follow the Zen arts. And I highly recommend, I don't have time now to share it with you, to look at the Chinese Faith Mind poem from the 6th century. It's just amazing. And it starts out, the great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. That kind of basically says it all. So, and it says, like, if you feel separate from God, separate from yourself, separate from others, say not to, embrace, breathe into it. So even if you have a cup of tea and just like a simple tea bag, it can become a moment of mindfulness. And there's many more descriptions of enlightenment experiences. I have 1 more minute. I also practice Baika, which is the music of the Sotosho school. It goes like with a little bell, but I don't know how good it comes across in Zoom. I just sing the first line for you. It is a song chanted when that body is being put into the fire. Namu Unchi Rakyanyurai Namu Unchi Rakyanyurai. And then the closest family member is offered to push the button to light the fire. So I do believe that there's something to be found in the Zen arts how we can meet each other without an agenda, purifying our heart and living as good as we can a life of clarity, so we can inspire others to meet us from heart to heart. And so my final verse is the end of the Diamond Sutra. So you should view this fleeting world, a star at dawn, a bubble in a stream, a flash of lightning in a summer cloud, a flickering lamp, a phantom, and a dream. ありがとうございました。
Thank you. Can we take about 10 seconds of silence to think about the questions we might have and reflect on what the speakers have brought us? Okay, now we have the gift of about 15 minutes or so to ask our scholar speakers questions. Feel free to raise a hand like this, or to use the little reactions button to do it, or to write a question in the chat box. I'll try to wrangle them. If you have a question for one speaker, please give that person's name at the beginning of your chat message so that they know to attend to it. And let's see what we've got.
While we're waiting for anybody to perhaps offer the second question, it's always the first one that's the hard one, right? Just a brief bookend to the last presentation. It reminds me of among the few items that I have in my larder, which is an interesting word for a rabbi to use, of stories. A story's told in Zen tradition. I've used it in a talk about how we misunderstand miracles. One student says, my master works great miracles. He stands on one side of a stream, I stand on the other. He draws in the air, and I capture the images on my tablet. And the other student says, no, 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 my master does far greater miracles than these. When he sleeps, he sleeps. When he eats, he eats. When he meditates, he meditates. And it's reminiscent of a commentary in Jewish tradition of, well, at least two. One, the phrase is in Exodus, Moses is told, go up to the top of the mountain and be there. And if he's going up to the top of the mountain, where else would he be? But we know endlessly in our own lives, there are moments when we are someplace, but we're not there. We're worried about what happened yesterday or what's about to happen tomorrow. Am I going to get that assignment done, et cetera, et cetera. So go up on the top of the mountain and be there. To actually be present in our own experience may be a key to unlocking an everyday kind of mystical encounter with the all, the infinite, or the experience that the wholly infinite, the most intimate, are one and the same. Last phrasing of this is, a student is instructed by his rabbi to go learn from another rabbi. And he comes back and says, well, what did you learn? All I did was watch him tying his shoes. You did not realize how important that spiritual adventure was, to watch him tying his shoes. Okay, so now it's time for the next question, I'm sure.
Just raise my hand if I may.
Please, yes.
Can I? Okay. Thank you, Rabbi. It helps me think that I'm swimming now between the storytelling narrative traditions that are more familiar to me in my tradition, but also this lovely presentation that we had, the last one by Tatjana, where I feel you're telling us about a practice and a way of being which while it's communicating, it is deliberately leaving a lot of space. You mentioned the light touch in what was it? In haiku, really. You were, because that's the verbal expression. You have the poems, but they're so brief. It's just, as you say, it's just a suggestion. And I was thinking about another form. I don't know if it's in the same tradition of sand garden. Are they sand gardens or something of that sort? And they seem to be telling a story. And I was wondering if there was a narrative component there at all in that art form.
You mean the gravel gardens that you rake?
Yes. I believe I was told that there, when you look at them, that there's a story that's being told. I don't know if that's correct or not.
Well, yeah, I mean, of course, many different stone gardens. They can be like inside a monastery, for example.
Yeah.
There are different dry gardens. There's some where the stones are set so that it's like a dry river. There are moss gardens. There are like at the Silver Pavilion that you have in Kyoto. You have like pyramids formed from it. So there are many different kinds. So of course there are many different stories. But yes, it always points to the vastness of the universe, the way the stones are placed. So the Ryoanji garden in Kyoto has been fascinated people for a long time. You cannot see the totality in one glance, and wherever your eyes go, there will be that empty space that you fill, and when you turn, there's another secret opening. It's always like an invitation. Yeah.
May I my guys, my second hog reference, may I piggyback on that? I'm old enough to remember Professor Leo Buscaglia, who used to be a fixture on PBS fundraisers. He called himself, and I'm going to try to imitate, the Professor of Love. But what was remarkable about him was his enthusiasm was awesome. It was as though his skin couldn't contain him. He tells a story of himself visiting that garden in Kyoto with a great master of the Zen tradition. And if you knew Buscaglia's affect, he couldn't help himself. Oh my goodness, oh, look at that, look at that. Oh, every vista, another reflection of joy. And until the Zen master, who to that point had said nothing, turned around, gently tapped him across the face and said, "Will you stop walking with your dirty feet in my mind?" I mean, the essence of go up on the top of the mountain and be there. There's more than enough time to be the critic demonstrating your wisdom, your insight, your capacity to integrate this stuff. Just have the experience already. Thank you for laughing.
I meant to mention, Dr. Zedek, that as far as I know for the mustard seed story, that the woman does go to different houses and she's asked to find a mustard seed at a house where there was no death. And
in the Buddhist tradition, you've heard it that way as well?
Yeah. And it is mostly a teaching on the importance of Sangha, of community, because she goes to all these places and there has been death one way or another everywhere. So that it's a tale of connecting. And it's through this connection she can let go, as she recognizes everybody is going through the same fate.
I'm not surprised that there are variations, because there's variations in every folklore, because we can never stop telling the stories and we often put our own stamp. But the first version I ever encountered of that story was exactly as I told it, but I'm delighted to know there are others, and I don't doubt it whatsoever.
I have a question I'd like to call on myself to ask. So I feel like I'm here, I've heard an interesting tension in thinking about story between the papers we've just heard from Dr. Myoko and Dr. Enriello. Dr. Myoko, like I think another question already raised, talked about leaving a lot of space and putting just that, just a suggestion, just a little bit, a really spare telling with a lot of room and an invitation. to complete or to take in. And Dr. Enriello's description of just the complexity of trying to figure out even the basic biography of a thinker that we want to know more about, right? How it's been told and why it's been told that way, and how maybe something was invented by someone else, but maybe under that influence, and just the thickness and the busyness of all of the stories about these mystics and the insights that they've had on their way to getting here. So I'm noticing two different extremes there. I'm wondering if anybody can help me and think of how those two extremes, which both seem true to me, can relate to our efforts, scholars, teachers, people, to figure out how to live in peace and coexistence, when even the dynamic of storytelling and of communication and invitation can be done well at such opposite extremes. I'm wondering if we can link that to the conference theme. Please, Dr.
I can't really answer your question and leave it to the other scholars to do that. But I was seeing the two sides with the Rabbi and Tatjana Myoko. It seems they so much complement each other. I always end up quoting my father. He used to say, at the heart of Islam is Buddhism. And when I ventured into the mystical realm, Buddhism and Hinduism actually made me understand it. And I always feel, and I must have said it a number of times today, that in the Quran, when God says that I created all these religions, so learn and understand and know. Basically, as I said, every tradition, they should go out into other traditions to understand their own traditions. That's the reason I feel about it. Now, I of course related to everything the Rabbi said, because that's the mystic folklore way. That was my research actually, that how the oral tradition is so rich in messaging, because it's so evocative and emotive and gears to the listener's mind and needs and contours it accordingly. And it's a flow and a flux, and life is a flow and a flux. So that's very easy to understand, because we are basically storytellers and narrators. The difficult part is in Islam, we also have silent zikr, which of course I am still struggling to fathom out, and which probably would be an easy thing for Tatjana Myoko, because she is cultivating that. And the silent zikr, my mind just wanders everywhere. I mean, I've struggled so far with it. So it's really not a question, it's my struggling to put the two together, which I know the two are both true, and we struggle with both of them. The Rabbi had his hands up.
Yeah, but Mulayka had her hand up first, and your comment and the question, I really hope I have time to respond, but please go.
Dr. Enriello, you had your hand up earlier. Can you?
Can I? Yes. You for the suggestion to deepen the discourse. I think simply academical research is very important. Like they said in another panel about the definition of peace, which should enlarge to consider also the sacred dimension of peace. The discourse is the same. Academic research should, I speak as a mathematician, I am, should put into its axioms also the axioms of religious tradition. So if one thing is said in the Quran, you don't need to believe to what it is said, but you need to consider that it is said in a holy text. If something is said in a popular tradition, those who study folklore says is a popular tradition. Maybe what is it's not the case of our fellow speakers, which are which had a high. I appreciated very much all the speakers. Maybe you listen people say, so if this is this way, and if a story is in the Midrash and the story is in the Quran, then the Quran is copied, no, as is derived from the Midrash, but it's not the way sacred texts work. Simply, they may be similar, but they are not necessarily derived one from the other. So axioms and rules are different in sacred tradition, are different than how other things works. Just that. So it should be taken in consideration. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mentioned in a previous session a long-standing Jewish notion called davar acher, means another interpretation. Not my right and your wrong one, but another one. And Nancy, I thought I detected in your question the notion of conflict, but my own assessment, my own experience has been much more of confluence rather than conflict in these presentations throughout the conference. But and it's just a but, and even if it is perhaps a little too saccharine an idea, what I think we're describing are different paths up the same mountain, even though we may have different views when we get to the top of that mountain. And certainly we're on different paths, that's for sure. But I want to suggest, especially since the word midrash has been injected in the conversation, it's a wonderful phrase, because it literally means to probe and to inquire and to discover. This little enthymeme. Historian says it happened and I can prove it. The theologian says, it happened, I can't prove it, I believe it. The student of Midrash says, it didn't happen, but I can make it happen.
Sounds very, very Judaic.
Well, let me take a second here. We have about 2 more minutes of the session officially, but the moderators for today's sessions have decided that we can have 15 more minutes in this room, whatever, to talk in a less structured way if you'd like. So if there are those among you who need to finish up and head out to whatever else you're doing, please feel free. If you want to talk further amongst yourselves, please feel free to stay. Julie will leave us the room available to continue more casual discussion from here. Before we do that, could we please get a final round of thank you to all 3 of our speakers, please?
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Let the record show we got a rousing standing
Yes.
ovation.
Yes.
Mulayka, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. You're
Yes.
so
Sorry, I was.
I'm sorry. I
Please.
really didn't get what you said at the end. If I understood it right, do please correct me. Where are you saying that the exam? Well, I'm not a mathematician. I'm anything but one. So, where are you saying that axiomatically we should not mix we should keep it separate? Is that what is the response to the fact that I said my father used to say that at the heart of Islam is Buddhism? We're responding to that in particular.
I'm not sure. Yes, I'm not sure I understood your question. In fact, I was responding to the moderator, not to your suggestion.
Oh, okay.
So, yes.
Okay.
I was responding to the fact how academics can manage to deal with this complexity about stories which are difficult to tell. And if I can take one more minute, someone in the private chat asked me about also Catherine from Siena and other Dominicans, and in fact, so the story is always the same. Catherine of Siena trying to escape from the punishment of her parents, which did not want her to be a Dominican, says that he receives her teachings in dream by St. Thomas Aquinas, which was which lived 1 century or 1 century and a half earlier than her. Now, I'm religious and I believe in miracles, so I have no problem to believe that this actually happened. But if we don't want to put miracles in the X of religious studies in an academic, from an academic point of view, we must anyway consider that Saint Catherine had some religious teachings. So in some way they should have been gone to her, and whatever you put things, you must consider that things had happened and that the words are there and the teachings are there. And so what I call the karst current, which karst currents in Italy are famous in central Italy. It's rivers that hide in the mountains and then exit back kilometers and kilometers far away, and you can tell what pet they had inside the mountains. And that's a spirituality. That's how spirituality runs over the centuries. Sometimes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dybbuk. It was such a rich presentation and kind of complementary. You kind of complemented each other in the different forms of devotions or search or seeking the truth, so to speak. Thank you very much.
There is an ancient Vedic creation story. I know Dr. Zedek, maybe I can find it for you. But it is the creation of the earth, was that the earth was covered with this wonderful ghee, sweet ghee. Everything was luminous and everything was this ghee, and it smelled so delicious. And people were luminous beings and everything was perfect. And then they felt tempted of tasting that ghee. And the more they started eating it, the more the light disappeared and the more people became separate from the light and became more indulgent, craving, all the conditioning happening.
Exciting. I've never heard that one. That's an exciting one.
I will look for it. I can send it to you. Yeah.
Please send it to all of us.
It does remind me of a creation story. I've never been able to verify this, but I was told it in my first trip to Egypt. I've just never been able to find it in a source. It came from a guide. The gods are having a party, which is different than the gods are at war, right? The chief god has too much to drink. Whoop, you and me. Which is not dissimilar in terms of the affect of the mythic construction of our values, as that human beings are the stuff inside the unfully formed poop. You got your choice: be poop, be vomit, or be whatever it means to be a photograph of the sacred.
That'll put you in your place if you aren't there yet.
Again, among the things that I find utterly engaging is that those myths are not just stories. They are the roadmaps of the reality in those worlds. They come out of the values and they shape the values, alas.
Not only that, when I entered the mystical realm, I found so much more meanings in all the ancient myths, whether it's Greek or Indian. I mean, they're a whole different realm to explore, which I wish I had enough time to.
Yeah, I agree. I'd be a fool not to. You know, but I suppose I've been a fool once or twice.
Such humility.
All right, maybe more than twice.
In Buddhism, it's a compliment to be a fool.
Yeah.
Yes.
By the way, I don't know if this is a Zen story or not. Maybe you would recognize it. A student is informed by his master the secret to enlightenment, but he must not share it with anyone. And he immediately runs to the marketplace and tells everyone. And the master says, he is far wiser than I. Does that echo at all?
I'm trying to wrap my mind around that story. So he's far wiser because he tells everybody.
Because he tells everyone, even though the master has said you're not allowed to share it.
So what's the moral of the story?
Oh, my own suspicion is it's not unlike what you suggested about the difference between wisdom, cleverness, and the capacity to be present.
I guess, I mean, what I recognize is that the master's role would be to inspire the student. But of course, only the student can walk the path.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no proselytizing in Buddhism because, I mean, there's nothing to convert to. And there is nowhere to go because the basic assumption is you are born as a Buddha, perfect and complete, lacking nothing. So there is nowhere to go. There is, of course, this process of discovery to close the gap. But there's no teachings to withhold. It should be given freely and questions by anybody. That's what the Buddha said himself. Question everything, find how true it is.
But you're ruining a good story with the truth. So.
What I see is both of them are right. I mean, we as long as we're in this world, we need them. I guess it's individual interpretation according to experiences. I don't know. Everything has so many meanings, and we only see a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
We have to. I guess we have to let go now because of the people like Judy.
I can't wait to read more of the little bit that's available about St.Dominic, though. So I thank you for that as well.
Yeah. What's the time? I have to go to the next one.
I have to run. Thank you all.
I think.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Yeah.
May your life go well.
Arigatou gozaimashita.
Arigatou gozaimasu. Arigatou.